So you need a rooftop fan, but you want to stay stealth. You just don't have the space for it, or you can't justify the cost. Have I got the video for you? So like me, you built out your van and covered the roof in solar panels. But after living actual van life, you realized, wow, I wish I would have left space for a rooftop fan. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to try it out. We'll see how it works. What I'm going to do is commandeer the van's factory blower motor. Why? Well, to understand that, you have to understand how the factory blower motor works. And it's actually very much in line with how a rooftop fan would work. You see, once the blower motor is running, it takes fresh air from outside, just the same way that your rooftop fan would. Brings it in through this grill, keeps out the critters and everything. Some vans are a little more lucky. They actually have a mesh screen in there. Anyway, fresh air goes in through some baffles so you don't get rainwater coming through your vents. And afterwards blows through, well, whichever selection you have here. The only selection that you're not going to be bringing in fresh outside air is if you're in recirculation mode. A lot of vans have a dedicated button for this, and the recirculation mode is exactly what it sounds like. It draws in the air from inside the vehicle and recirculates it inside. Now this is great for, well, as GM thought, max AC, because that's the only way to enter recirculation mode on these vans. Terrible design. So, goes in through there, actually filters through the whole van, and through the back side, in front of your taillights, there's a one-way baffle back here that the air is going to exhaust through. And at that point, you've just successfully circulated all of the cabin air. Fresh air from outside, stale air out the back. And of course, you can direct the air too. Say you're cooking on your countertop, and, you know, right here, you want to get fresh air and push out all the cooking smells. Open the window, air takes the path of least resistance, blows in fresh air, out through the window. So, you know, it does the same thing that a rooftop fan would do. Anyway, back to the video. What I'm going to do is commandeer the van's factory blower motor so that when the key is off, it will be run through this little module that I picked up online. It's a 7 to 70 volt DC fan motor controller up to 30 amps. Now, I made another video testing out the blower motor amperage draw on all 4 different speeds via the factory controller up front, and none of it went over 30 amps. So I think that this will work. Well, I'm wiring up this module to my house batteries back here. They're going to draw off of my house batteries, and with that, it gives me a good indication of, you know, how much it's using. I have this battery monitor up here, and it'll show me exactly how many watts I'm either charging or using, and it'll show me an estimated time of about how much I have left. It's a pretty basic little module. It only has 4 connections, the power, positive and ground, and then the 2 outputs to the blower motor. I'll show some schematics of how it all comes together. One thing that I do like is that this module, you can take the switch out right here. It's a really smooth potentiometer. It feels pretty good quality for just being some, you know, cheap Chinese motor controller. And you can pop it out of the front and extend these 3 wires out as long as you need it, pretty much. So I'm gonna try wiring it up and see if it works. In theory, it should work fine. So I extended the 3 wires on the potentiometer, the speed controller for the blower fan, and it's mounted up pretty nice. I'd use the router to trim down the overall thickness of the tongue and groove board that I mounted it on. It doesn't give you a lot of threads on the shank for this potentiometer, but it looks good. And down here, there's the extended wires. And I'm going to mount this module wherever it ran off to, right back here. There's a piece of wood right back there I'd like to mount it to. So this will certainly reach down there. So I just got done measuring the total length of wire that's going to run from my fuse block down there all the way under the hood to where the blower motor is. And overall it's just over 12 feet. And looking at my video of how much power my blower motor draws, on full speed it's under 15 amps, but that's also at 13.5-ish volts. So either way, looking at the online calculators for the length versus amperage, it looks like I'll be fine with just a 12 gauge wire going all the way up. I don't see why I couldn't simply run only the positive wire up to my blower circuit up front and just piggyback the motor negative through the ground. I had planned on having this, the motor output simply grounded to the chassis, and then the motor itself grounded to the chassis, just using a chassis ground instead of running a dedicated 12 volt negative wire. Now, I wasn't positive if that would work, mostly because I wasn't sure on how this fan motor controller really operated. Well, I did a lot of research, and this is a pulse width modulation variable controller, where your OEM blower motor uses something much more inefficient, a resistor pack. So the OEM setup, when you put it on low, it's sending a full 12 volts out, but it's going through a huge resistor, wasting a ton of electricity by turning it into heat. And after it gets out of that resistor, then the voltage is stepped down so much that it doesn't run the fan at full speed, it runs it at low. It also has a separate resistor for low medium, medium high, and then high speed, it just puts 12 volts straight to the fan, no energy lost there. But this pulse width modulation device, it's really pretty genius, and instead of heating up resistors and wasting all that energy as heat when you want to change the speeds, what it does is basically zap the fan with 12 volts, but not constantly. Say you want a low speed, it'll give 12 volts off, 12 volts off, 12 volts off. Or if you want a higher speed, 12 volts off, 12 volts off, 12 volts off, a little higher, higher, higher. Basically, it gives full power to the fan and shuts off the power. Full power shuts off the power. And the rate at which it does that, you could look at that in hertz. Now, depending on how high the hertz are, that's going to determine how fast the blower's going. And I'll demonstrate it for you right here with this simple USB fan. Say that you want a low speed. Now, this fan doesn't have any speed controller. It has an on-off switch on the back. But you could effectively make it a low speed by turning it on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. Or you want a higher speed, you leave it on for a little longer, off for a little shorter. So on, off, on, off, on, off. Or you want full speed, that pulse width modulator is just going to say on, 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 on. So it's really a genius device, and the efficiency is much, much higher than you'd get through your OEM setup. But the way that it does that with the pulse width modulation, I wasn't sure if it needed a complete circuit through the motor positive, through the motor, and then back through the motor negative, dedicated only to the fan, not getting caught up in the vehicle chassis ground. I wasn't sure if it was going to do anything funky. Long story short, this is a positive pulse width module. So it only controls the power going through the positive wire. You could 100% use the vehicle chassis ground the whole way. So I had originally planned on doing that. I did all that research, figured that's the best way to go. Well, then I had the really bright idea. These rooftop fans, you can reverse them. You can have them push fresh air into the van, or simply reverse it, and then it pulls the stale air up and out of the van. Well, I figured that's brilliant. Why won't I do that with my blower motor? So I went out, bought a dual pull, dual throw switch. This is exactly the kind of switch that you would use to reverse anything. You'd put the center outputs up to the fan, and then say you had this as your positive, this is your negative, you would just swap it on the bottom. So you'd have positive over here, negative over there. And when you push it one way or the other, it would effectively reverse the current to the fan, running it backwards. This is just a standard brushed DC motor fan, so it 100% will run backwards, reverse the polarity. But then, sitting at the dinner table, thinking to myself, how will a squirrel cage, a centrifugal fan, work in reverse? Because the blades are all pointed a specific direction. It's not your standard fan like these USB fans. Here's a picture of one for reference. You can see that it uses this cage style fan. This is the same that your home heater and air conditioner use. It's a very efficient fan, but through a lot of research, it took me a long time to find this video. I'll put the video right here. Check it out. It's really interesting. Anyway, you can't reverse it. You can, but it's just going to blow the same way, just at a very reduced output. Let's get back to it. Hopefully that didn't bore you to death, but it is important. Okay, so the inside installation done. So here's my quick schematic. It's going to use two different relays. Okay, let's dig right into this wiring diagram. Let's put in your house battery there. You'll want to run a fused connection, whether you have a fuse block or just a inline fuse that you can use. There's your fan controller, a relay, automotive relay, and down there's just my factory blower motor resistor. The two wires are what go to the blower motor. So run your positive wire over to the fan controller, ground the fan controller, and as I said earlier, you can just use the chassis ground as the motor ground, so you can piggyback off of that. Then you run your motor positive all the way up to the relay to the normally closed pin, which is 87A. And then pin 86, you're going to want to fuse that to an ignition positive source. That could be your underhood fuse block, anything that runs 12 volt positive only when the key is on. Now, with your blower resistor itself, really you can just chop the wires going to the blower motor, and you can run the negative off the blower resistor all the way up to pin 85 on the relay, then put the wire all the way back to the fan, or just splice into it and piggyback off of that. And then from the blower resistor, you're actually going to run that up to 87, the positive wire, and then pin 30 goes right back to the blower motor itself. So that's pretty much it. Let me make it clear that you should definitely have a fuse in any positive wires that you're running. So I'll get that out of there. But anyway, that's the whole wiring diagram. Hopefully that makes it pretty quick and easy to follow. I'll leave it here on the screen for just a second if you want to pause and take a screenshot of it. So there's the quick schematic. I'm going to wire in some relays now. Almost any time that I go to the salvage yard, I like to come out with a couple fuses, relays, circuit breakers, because they're just going to get crushed with the car anyway. Let's see. You do need to use a 5-pin relay. A 4-pin relay won't work because it doesn't have the normally closed position. It only has a well, here it shows the schematic right on this relay. So you can see pin 30 would be right over there, and the normally open pin would be 87. So you really need one that has a 87 and a 87A, such as this one right here. Can see that middle pin is the 87A, and that 87A is going to be the one that is normally closed. So right now on this relay, pins 30 and 87A are making contact, but once this relay is energized, the contact will go from 30 and 87A to only 30 and 87. That's just basic relays. So let's see if I can find another 5-pin relay. There's one. I don't know if I trust this brand of emitter. Let's see if I can find some more OEM ones. Right there. I really don't need a giant one. Do I have any mini relays? 5-pin. I don't. So it's going to be much easier if I just take this assembly off. It's just the plug and the two 5.5mm bolts. So I'll take that off, and then I'll get everything soldered up on the bench. And then the only two things I'll have to solder once I'm done with this will be the 2 wires coming from the back there. So here is the finished relay pack. Not very pretty, but it's going to be highly functional. All the connections, heat shrink, double-walled heat shrink with adhesive, and most importantly, it matches this diagram, so it should work. I did test, and the negative coming off of the resistor relay pack here is a constant ground, key on, key off, 24/7, whether the fan's running or not. It's a constant ground, so I was able to tie in my ground here, up here. So the only two things that I have left are the ignition positive right here. I'll tap into the fuse block on the driver's side for that. And I actually do have to run the negative all the way back to my secondary fan controller in the back of the van, and then just connect this up to the positive that I've already ran from the back of the van. So the relay pack is wired up inside the van, and a quick test of it, this is going to be the ignition positive right here. So anytime the key is turned on, this is going to be live with 12 volts positive. And just to test it out, you can see the relay sitting up there. Should hear both of them click on when I touch it to the positive terminal down here. Perfect. So now I'm gonna run this over to the fuse box down here and pull 12 volts positive, ignition positive off one of those with this little add a fuse circuit. Kind of gimmicky, but they work. Most importantly, it's fused. 5 amps, honestly, is probably overkill for just activating the 2 relays, but that's fine. Yeah, I'll get it wired up and excited to check this thing out. It is all wired up under the hood, done under the hood. Well, actually, I need some 1/4-inch split loom to cover up some of the wiring right up there, but other than that, I was able to run it right along the factory alternator wire all the way down to the fuse box. Use my add a fuse, and yeah, it works perfect. Here, I'll show you right now. And by working perfect, I mean works just as it should from the factory. So I'll turn the key on, and the blower motor works. It's the simple things. So now just need to finish running this motor negative, or I guess I'd say motor minus wire, all the way back to the motor controller back here. Okay, moment of truth. Got a fuse here. Let's plug it in, see if it all works. Nothing. That's fun. Okay then. Well, that was an easy fix after sitting out here with a voltmeter for quite some time. I unzip tied it and saw that the little slider switch over there must have gotten bumped to the middle, which is labeled as stop, run, stop, brake. So slide it over to run, red light comes on, and listen to this. Beautiful. And just for fun, let me see just how much power this thing is using. Let me disconnect the solar charging. Okay, solar 0 watts coming in. Panels are disconnected. Okay, just idle. Van is using 1 amp. Let me see what that is. Is that this motor controller? Because if so, I'm gonna have to add a switch. Turn it off. No, that's just regular standby. It might be the power inverter. I'll turn that off. That was a big amount. Okay, anyway, I'll leave that off. Let me turn this controller back on. There we go, it's on. Uses 0.03 amps, about less than a watt. And let's turn it on high. Okay, so the blower on high uses about 10 amps. Nice. And let's turn it to about half. 2 amps. Wow, very nice. Okay, now let's try this out. We'll have the blower on high back here. And then once I put the key in, then it should automatically go back to these controls. Okay, so once I turn it to run, the fan should switch to low. Ha. Oh, that's beautiful. So when the key is on, the blower motor is using the van battery. When the key is off, the blower motor is using my battery bank. That is fantastic. So here we go. Not sure if you can hear it, but this fan is running full speed. Tee off, vans off, running full speed off of the house batteries. And look at this, I'm still charging the battery, still getting a plus 2 amps, but then again, I have ridiculous amounts of solar. But that was the whole reason I couldn't put a rooftop fan in. So I'd say the whole thing levels out.